On today's show, we'll recap the preseason and break down what difficult roster decisions management has ahead of the 5 p.m. roster deadline. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DeStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. What's going on, Dave? How are you feeling on a Monday?
Feeling pretty good, Busy weekend.
Busy weekend is for sure. Leafs finish up the preseason with a dub over the Detroit Red Wings and close out the preseason with a 4-1-1 record. All is well. No panicking. Remember when it was 0-1-1 and reporters are asking when panic sets in to Craig Berube, and he basically laughed at the question. He's like, it's preseason. And for sure enough, they go out, they win 4 straight games. And again, it doesn't mean a whole lot. It's preseason, but it's nice to see that the team looked a little bit sharper and sharper as the games went on. And I thought that the main club looked pretty sharp and pretty solid the other night against Detroit as well.
Yeah, they did. And, seeing it firsthand, there are a lot of good things to point out, especially in this game.
Such as, Dave, as someone who was in the building.
Well, especially second period on, I think Detroit spent no time in the Leafs end.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Leafs, the way they cycled the puck in the Detroit zone. All 4 lines really, they all found ways to keep possession of the puck. Didn't provide much opportunity for Detroit to get anything going offensively after they took the lead. So that was the encouraging part. I would say that there was opportunities missed to really add to that lead. Once they did take the lead, I felt like that game should not have been close.
Yeah.
At all. But I did like what I saw from just every line kind of, especially because they made changes to the lines, lines 2 and 3 were all pretty much thrown together new, right? Tavares going back up to the second line. Then you have Pontus Holmberg taking the third line center role. So a little bit of mixing and matching there, but I liked what I saw from the group altogether.
Yeah, new is maybe the wrong word to use because it kind of just reverted back to what Sheldon Keefe used to roll with Tavares and Nylander, and then I think at times Holmberg was the third line center last year for the Maple Leafs in a very short span, but did spend some time there for sure. So it was kind of funny to see, Berube realize, all right, this might be the best line of combinations that we could possibly get out there. But I thought that, the main thing was Matthews looked good. Matthews looked sharp, right? Really nice goal that he scored. Cross ice, gets a nice little one-timer, elevates the puck, and hits that thing top corner. That's a good sign, right? When that guy's putting pucks where he wants it. And then a really nice play on the JT, on the John Tavares goal. Just kind of, actually, you know what? That was a great play from all 3 of those players, right? Marner wins a board battle along the boards, which you love to see. And then Matthews, little dipsy doodle, dangles his man. Nice little, backhand saucer up to JT, waits it, takes a little stutter, waits for the goalie to get down, the defender to pass, and then he rips it home. Really nice pass, really nice play from those 3 overall. So, I thought the Maple Leafs looked good the other night. They certainly did look good, and it was a nice way to wrap up the preseason. And like I said, they finished up 4-1-1 on the preseason. Who would you say was the camp MVP for the Maple Leafs?
The camp MVP.
Come on, it's not that hard.
No,
Come
it's
on.
Nicky Bobby.
Nicky Bobby, shake and bake. Nicky Bobby, camp MVP. What do you have? 5 goals throughout the camp. Played his way onto the roster, and the only question is like now it's like second or third line. Looks like third line because that's where he finished. Right, finished playing with Holmberg there on the third line. So it's probably where he ends up. But you do got to tip your cap to the guy, right? Like he was dealt a not a tough hand, but like it was a tricky situation coming in. He's got to compete for a roster spot. He didn't really want to be there. He had signed a contract days before camp, but didn't really love how things had played out, and came back with his tail tucked between his legs after nobody would trade for him. And all of a sudden he comes out and it's like, okay, at least got something here. But, can he parlay it into a great season, right? A regular season. It's one thing to light it up in the preseason. We've seen that before from many guys. And then come regular season when the real stuff begins and, you're playing not as many minutes, not as high up in the lineup. You don't get as many opportunity, and you're playing against NHLers on a nightly basis. Sometimes that production dries up, but hopefully Nicky Bobby can keep her going here for the Buds.
Yeah, that's one thing, we've always talked about is getting that scoring lower in the lineup.
Yeah.
Right. We know the top 6 is going to be able to put in the offense. Can they get it from the bottom 6? That's I think going to be the challenge throughout the year. But if you get a Nick Robertson going on the third line, like play on the third line, sure. It's getting him to be productive while playing those third line minutes.
It's productive, but it's also like it's not just about scoring. Like I don't know if you heard Brad Treliving was making the rounds on Friday, doing the media stuff, and he was asked about Nick Robertson, and he mentioned that he's like, yeah, he's a good player, like he's good. That's why we wanted to keep him around in Toronto, but it's more than just what he's doing when the puck's on his stick, right? Like he's got to be able to defend and he's got to be able to do other things in order to make an impact, to be able to get those minutes so he can produce offensively. So that's kind of where his game's going to have to really take a big step up. Like we know that he can score. I think last year, if you look at goals per 60, he was second on the team behind Austin Matthews. The problem is he just didn't see a lot of ice time. All right. Like he was taken out. He was sitting in the press box for a lot of games. Then he would come in and score a goal and then back to the box you go because he was just do what was needed defensively. Berube's going to have a pretty stern line with him. It's like, hey, if you're scoring, great, but we need you to do other things as well. So hopefully Nicky Bobby can parlay this great preseason, great camp into a good regular season. And hey, if he still wants to be traded, if he's having a good season, he's only helping the cause there because all of a sudden people might start being willing to pay what the Leafs are looking for out of Nick Robertson. I thought the goalies were also pretty solid. That was encouraging to see. Both Joseph Woll and Anthony Stolarz. Even Dennis Hildeby looked good. Obviously, Matt Murray was fine. So I thought the goaltending was solid throughout camp. But there's one person who I would consider the biggest camp surprise, and I'm curious who you would like if we're on the same page here. Who do you like was the camp surprise this season?
The camp surprise?
Yeah.
Are we thinking like a certain defenseman?
Maybe so.
I got a little when I was watching the game. I like it's different watching the game in person on TV because you're paying attention to jersey numbers, especially.
Yeah.
Seeing somebody wear number 51 and actually be sound defensively was a sight to behold. So seeing Philip Myers play top 4, obviously coming in for Jake McCabe, wearing number 51, and looking pretty like you didn't hear about him too much.
Yeah,
that's because he was pretty solid, pretty quiet, pretty solid from what he was. For a guy that maybe was a borderline option for the NHL this year, most likely AHL body.
Yeah, for a hot minute. I mean, he has a chance to be like a Simone Benoit type of player. Like he's the guy I look at. It's like, hey, that's their possible Simone Benoit. Like he's still youngish. I think he's only 25 years old. Like he's still relatively young in terms of NHL body. And I
He's
believe
27, by the way, just so you.
he's 27 now. Oh my God. I remember, didn't
He
was
got
on
into the
World
NHL
Juniors, wasn't
almost like right away when he was like he's been in the NHL since like 2018.
he? Really? Wow. I don't know why I thought he was younger than that. Because I remember being on the World Junior team, and he was with Philly for a while, and he was kind of like that a guy. Like he was a late draft pick, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe even undrafted.
I think
Philly.
I think he got signed by the Flyers as an undrafted
Yeah,
player.
undrafted, and then all of a sudden they were like, oh, this guy's a player, and then kind of didn't turn into that. But hey, maybe at 27 something's clicking. He was a surprise for sure. I thought that he actually had played well and maybe earned the spot as like first call up for defenseman. But Connor Timmins might have played his way into this lineup. I don't know if you believe that or agree with that, but it feels like he has an opportunity to stick with this roster because he was not part of the initial round of cuts. And I don't know, man. Like I think Connor Timmins might have a shot, and that was not something I expected to say. I kind of pictured him as a guy that was going to get put on waivers, whether he got claimed or not, whatever. But I fully expected that to happen. He may have beat out a guy named Timothy Liljegren for one of those roster spots come opening night. What do you think about that?
You know what? Like just seeing what Berube has had to say about a Connor Timmins versus what he's had to say about a Timothy Liljegren. Yeah, I probably say that. My only concern about Connor Timmins, honestly, and watching him play that game, guy needs to stay out of the box.
That is the one, and that's kind of been an issue for him for a couple of years now.
But what I do like is, you know, he's got the size and he can break out the puck. That's kind of his bread and butter there.
Well, and that's
what they like.
Yeah, and look, that's exactly like how many times have we heard Craig Berube say, like, you know, you got to do more than just one thing, right? And I think too, I don't know, you look at Timothy Liljegren and you think to yourself, like, what is he, right? Like, he's not really that good in his own end. He's not that good of a puck mover either. He's kind of just, you know, he could do a bunch of these things adequately. He's not good at anything. I don't like, just what is he? You know what I mean? Whereas Connor Timmins, you know, more defined player, right? Like he actually gives you that puck moving ability. And you know what you're going to get in that regard. Defensively, you know, it's a work in progress for sure. You know, that's no secret. But if you're putting him next to Simon Benoit, you know, like, all right, you've got somebody who is capable of being net front, who's capable of taking care of business in front of the goalie, and, you know, who can be a stable presence, right? Kind of like how, you know, Morgan Riley was, you know, early with the TJ Brody days. It was like, all right, Riley can be that rover puck moving guy who can jump up into the rush and, you know, lead a rush, break the puck out because he knows he's got, you know, backup in TJ Brody. So if you're playing alongside a Simon Benoit, it might not be a terrible, you know, idea to have a really good puck moving defenseman on that line. So if you're hemmed in your own end, you know, you have someone who could skate it out or make that first pass to get the puck out and get it into the hands of your forwards. So I'm surprised. I didn't expect to be having this conversation, but Connor Timmins might have, you know, might break through with this roster. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting conversation. Why don't we come back? We'll take a break. We'll come back. Let's update everyone on where we're at with this roster, because we did have some cuts over the weekend. There's still some to come as well. The Leafs have to get down to 23 players or you know, below that $88 million cap ceiling by 5 p.m. today. So we'll tell you guys where we're at with that and what decisions still loom for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's coming up next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. So just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Welcome back into the Locked On at Leafs podcast. Mike DeStefano and Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday morning, Monday through Friday, all Leafs, all the time here in the Locked On Leafs podcast. You can find us wherever you get a podcast, audio-wise for you on-the-go listeners, and video-wise, you can check out the podcast on YouTube. Just search up Locked On Leafs, hit subscribe, and we would be forever thankful. You know, season's starting up in a couple of days. We're less than 100 shy of, I think we're like, 80 shy of 6,000 subscribers. So it's growing. It's nice to see. All right, Dave. So today's a pretty big day. Today we find out what the roster is going to look like. By 5 p.m., the Toronto Maple Leafs have to have a cap-compliant roster submitted to the league. So that means they're going to have to be down to either 23 players that'll make up a combination of cap that does not exceed the $88 million salary cap space, or any combination of players under that also doesn't exceed the cap ceiling. And there's a couple of moves that need to be made. So they did make a couple of roster decisions over the weekend. They sent down Alex Steeves. They sent down Marshall Rifai, who was a pretty good camp story. And Matt Murray was also sent down on waivers, along with a number of other AHLers and kind of junior players. Those were the three notable players that the Maple Leafs put on waivers yesterday. I guess Murray is probably the one that, I don't know if worry is the right word to use, but has the most likelihood of potentially being claimed. Like, do you think Murray sneaks through? Is that a worry for you? Like, where are you at with that one?
I think that's a possibility. Just look around the league. Yeah, a lot of goaltenders were thrown onto the
wire
waivers. Like you look at a James Reimer was thrown on there, and but the thing is, Alex Lyon was, oh god, do I have nightmares of watching Alex Lyon beat the Leafs? But teams, yeah, there are teams who could use not even just a third, just a dependable third goalie, right?
A second goalie. There's some teams that could use him as a second goalie, like a backup everyday NHLer.
Which is eerie to think about when we consider what Matt Murray's what we were talking about a year ago with Matt Murray, and that his NHL career might have been, in jeopardy.
Well, that's the thing. You just don't know what you're going to get from this guy. The problem is, last time he was put on waivers, right? He was a $6 million goalie. No one was going to touch him at that, with the way that he was struggling. At $800K, at league minimum, there's probably a few teams that would be willing to take a flyer that Matt Murray, former 2-time Stanley Cup winner, can find his form, right? That is, I think, a possibility. I look at two teams. I was taking a look at the rosters and thinking, okay, who could use who would he be an upgrade as a backup goalie, not a third, because most teams aren't going to carry 3 goals here, so no one's going to claim him to only put him back on waivers, I don't believe. But who could legitimately use him as an upgrade in net? And I found 2 teams that make a lot of sense. The Tampa Bay Lightning being one. Jonas Johansson is just he's just not a competent backup. Like last year, he had to play a lot of games because of the Vasilevsky injury, and he almost cost the Tampa Bay Lightning their season. He had a 337 goals against, an 890 save percentage through 26 games last year. So Matt Murray would, if he's healthy, I guess, which he is right now, would be an upgrade on Jonas Johansson. So if I'm the Tampa Bay Lightning, that's maybe something I look at. Could be a Reimer, could be a Lion, could be one of those players as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Murray. But, that was one team that I looked at and was like, they might be looking at the wire for an upgrade.
Yeah, and you can't take any chances, right? When you're looking at goaltending, like Matt Murray's free. It's a free look for a team right now that is looking for a better backup option. It's a possibility.
Yeah. Now I will mention Chris Johnson wrote about this on The Athletic. He did point out that Matt Murray does have a $100,000 bonus that was strategically baked into his contract that is due on Thursday. So anyone that does bring Matt Murray onto their team will have to stroke a check for $100K on Thursday. Whether that deters people or not from bringing in Murray, I do not know. I would think that billionaire owners are rich enough where $100K would not necessarily deter them, but they did the same thing last year with Marty Jones, right? And Martin Jones squeaked through. So maybe the same thing happens here. But so those were the moves that were made to trim the roster a little bit, but still some decisions to come because the team is currently A, over the 23-man limit, and B, still above the $88 million cap ceiling as well, and still have yet to sign Max Pacioretty and Steven Lorentz. So lots of decisions still to come here for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I guess you know what? I want to start with the LTIR conversation, I suppose, because I think that could clear up a little bit of what we have going forward. So, again, listening to Brad Treliving speak on Friday, doing the media rounds, Dave, he was on overdrive, and I heard him mention that Connor Dewar is still a couple of weeks away. So there's a high probability that he starts the year on LTIR, and probably the same for Yanni Hakanpää, I would imagine. So that does create some space and does create a roster space and cap space for the Maple Leafs, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think especially for Dewar, as soon as I heard Treliving say a few weeks, it's just like he seems like a logical candidate to put on LTIR. I know the Leafs probably didn't even want to have to go and use LTIR, but I mean it's just the reality of the situation they find themselves in. And like Hakanpää too, it's like the guy has barely practiced, right? And he hasn't gone in. He wasn't good enough or ready enough to get into a game. So I think taking the patient approach, especially with a Hakanpää, is probably the best route for this team. And like, it's not like they're in such a dire strait where they need to rush him to play. They right now we're talking about how do they get everything to work? How do they get all the pieces of the puzzle to work? It's like, okay, maybe we can, pivot and like kick this decision down the road a little bit on guys that we need to move in and out of the lineup.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do between now and the 5 p.m. deadline. Let me pull up cap wages and let's do that little exercise and see exactly, I guess, what options the Maple Leafs have in that. Well, we'll take another break, actually. Let's take a break. And when we come back, we can talk about what options the Leafs have and kind of, I guess, project maybe what the roster will look like today at 5 p.m. So we'll do that on the other side. I'm Mike DeStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NHL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And when you place your first $5 bet, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can make that bet on anything. And we got the Maple Leafs coming up, Leafs, Habs. go ahead, sauce a little money line bet, $5, get yourself $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's on FanDuel.com. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DeStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as always. The Maple Leafs with a couple of tough decisions to make by 5 p.m. today on Monday, October 7th, which is now just a day before it's the eve of the start of the North American side of the NHL season, because we technically had the NHL season begin over the weekend with the Devils. Sheldon Keefe winning himself a couple of games out in Prague over the Buffalo Sabres. So congratulations to the Devils for getting off to the good start that, quite frankly, I think a lot of us predict them to have, getting that goalie, and Markstrom came up big for them over the weekend. All right, to the Leafs, though. So we were talking about how they have, some decisions to make and what options the team has moving forward. So I'm actually going to pull up cap wages, and we can do this exercise again, Dave, and pretty much just look at where the Leafs are at, currently, who they've got signed and whatnot, and the decisions they have to make. So if we're taking a look right now at the Maple Leafs and who they still have at camp, this is pretty much what it looks like. So it's obviously a full roster. I've technically signed Lorentz and Pacioretty just so that they are, but we could figure that out in a sec. But yeah, so we're sitting there with 15 forwards. They've got 8 defensemen, a couple goalies. So they've got to get down because, we're looking at $2.8 million over the cap at this point, and obviously more than 23 guys on the roster. So for me, Dave, and you could tell me if you feel differently, I was taking a look and I'm like, okay, who is guaranteed a roster spot? And I think that there are 18 players who are locks to make the roster. And then there's pretty much 5 guys where the Maple Leafs are like, okay, we can pick 4 or 5. So I'll tell you who that is, and then we could kind of work from there. So let's start by putting the guys who are on LTIR, who we believe will start the season, on LTIR, and that'll make things a lot easier. So that is Connor Dewar and Yanni Hakanpää. If they start the year on IR, this is kind of where we're at. It does help with some of the cap space. Now you're only 200 over the cap, which is why I said there's 5 guys, and you can pick 4 of the 5, and that will make up your roster. So when it comes to locks, Dave, obviously all 3 guys on the top line, locks, correct? Nyes, Matthews, Marner, locks. Nylander, Tavares, Domi, locks. Is that entire third line a lock to you? Nicholas Robertson, Pontus Holmberg, and Calle Jarnkrok, are they all locks at this point?
Well, Jarnkrok's not even available right now. He was hurt again after playing. So I wonder if he starts the season at this rate, if he's not healthy.
That's a possibility, I suppose. Yeah, Jarnkrok could, but I don't think
likely if he is playing, if he's healthy, that's where he's gone.
Yeah, and he's not, I don't think, an LTIR candidate either. No. So he's gonna have to be on the roster, even if he's on IR. That cap still counts against your book. So I think you have to right now pencil him in as a lock. Bobby McMahon, lock or not lock?
Yes, a lock.
David Camp, lock or not lock?
With the way things are going, he has to be a lock, unfortunately.
I agree. So we have the same exact 11 players, 11 forwards that we have as locks, because I don't think Lorentz is a lock. I don't know if Pacioretty's a lock. I mean, he kind of is, but just for the purposes of this, since he's technically still on his PTO as the timing of this podcast, we'll consider him a non-lock. Ryan Reeves is a non-lock. So the forward group, that's what we got. So for now, this is how I'm going to do this exercise. I'm just going to put everyone on LTIR, including Pacioretty. So that's what it looks like forward-wise. Defensively, all right, Riley, Tanev, lock. McCabe, OEL, lock. Simon Benoit, lock. Now we're looking at Timothy Liljegren and Connor Timmins. Lock or not? Are they both locks? One of them? One of the two? I mean, how does that work out for you think?
I think Timmins, I'd say, is a lock, and I think Liljegren is either he might not even be on the team before 5 o'clock. Like just with the way that everyone's talking about it,
Trade or waivers, though?
I ain't traded. I don't think they're gonna waive Timothy Liljegren.
So if they trade Liljegren, that does make things a lot easier. Now the problem is if they were going to trade Liljegren, they probably would have kept Marshall Rifai with the club. No.
Well, I think that's why they're gonna keep Philip Myers. That's why they didn't waive him.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Actually, I guess Phil Myers could be that 7th. Yeah,
And
that's true.
also McCabe, I don't know what his status is either because he was technically not available to play.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything too.
I know
crazy.
it's a day-to-day thing. It's not anything that's viewed as long term, but
Yeah,
like they're gonna need an extra defenseman basically. So I think I'd say Liljegren will make it for now, and then maybe a trade happens. It'll be interesting to see if anyone else is placed on waivers. Come noon today. As we're recording this morning, we don't know if anyone's been placed on waivers yet on top of what they did on Monday. On Sunday.
Yeah. So for now, I guess all 3 of these are maybes, not locks, right?
No.
Timmins, Liljegren, and Myers. It's basically like they can pick 2 of 3 of those guys. So for now, again, we'll just do this. So these are the locks. These are who we believe are locks, and everyone else is kind of fighting for spots. So there's about $7 million in cap space that they've got allotted to these guys. So basically, I think there's 2 forwards and 2 defensemen. So of the forwards, pick 2 of Reeves, Lorentz, and Pacioretty, and then pick 2 of Timmins, Liljegren, and Philip Myers. That's how I think the Maple Leafs have to look at this. So look, Pacioretty, I think, is quite likely to make this team. So I think Pacioretty is so close to being a lock. I'm ready to give him that spot. What about you?
Yeah, I would say so.
So then it's between Steven Lorentz and Ryan Reeves. That's who I think the Maple Leafs, the war room today, Brad Treliving, Craig Berube, and company, I think that's who they're deciding between. Do we sign Steven Lorentz? Do we get him under contract? Or do we release him from his PTO and keep Ryan Reeves around? I think those are the decisions that are being discussed right now within the Maple Leafs camp. And like I have a lean. I'm curious where you're at. I'm sure you know where I am. But it wouldn't shock me if they went Ryan Reeves.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me, but like I watching Steven. By the way, I think it's Lorentz. I think that's everyone. He doesn't want to correct anyone.
It's so like I hate when players do that. It's like you've been in the league for like 4 years, and it's been Lorentz for that entire time, and now all of a sudden, like when you're in Carolina, when you're in Florida, and now all of a sudden it's like, it's actually Lorentz. It's like, guy.
Yeah, I saw that one of the media guys asked him, he's like, would you prefer Lorentz or do you prefer Lorentz? And he's like, it doesn't really matter to me. And they're like, well, okay, if you're addressing yourself to someone, who is it? It's Lorentz. But I like watching him play, and I'm like, it's so tough to see him not on this team. But it's also like, then that means you have to cut someone. And will they cut their, the Brad Treliving's golden child and Ryan Reeves, right? Like Reeves didn't look terrible.
No, and he did a good job setting up like Lorentz on. I'm gonna try my best setting up Lorentz on the goal the other night, right? Like that was just a heavy, hard forecheck, and then gets the puck. Like Reeves looked fine. But personally, like
defensively, I just don't. Yeah, like it come playoff
exactly
time.
Exactly.
Right? You need a Lorentz in the lineup versus a Reeves.
Well, what else can you give me, right? Outside of fighting. And for Ryan Reeves, it's like not a whole lot. Lorentz can actually defend, and he could kill penalties for you as well. So, he gives you something else, right? And for me, if I were putting the lineup together, I would prefer that, obviously, that gives you more flexibility and just more options with him. Whereas Reeves, it's like, all right, yeah, he'll go out there and play 8 minutes, maybe get into a fight, but You know, you're not going to get a whole lot more out of him. But like for whatever reason, you know, like the Leafs do feel indebted to Ryan Reeves, but I don't know. So like, where do you want to go with this exercise? Do we want to sign Lorentz? Is it possible too that they sign him and waive him and hope that he goes to the Marlies, or do you think he's an NHL player? Like that's a possibility too. They could sign him.
It is a possibility, but I think a team claims him. Like,
yeah,
I just see that. I don't feel like I'm overrating. I don't think I'm like too.
It's a fourth liner. It's not like
he's not like, oh, we have to do whatever we can to get a Steven Lorentz, but I think you can waive a Ryan Reeves, and I don't think teams are claiming him. Okay. I just don't think that's happening.
So let's do that. So let's waive Ryan Reeves. Let's send him to the minors. That makes things a little bit more clearer. Okay, now we got to focus on the defensemen, and we can pick 2 of 3 defensemen because at this moment there are $5 million in cap space, pretty much, and just basically, yeah. Oh, I actually maybe technically, can you have all 3 at this point?
I don't know. Will they have enough roster space? That's the problem.
Yeah, they do actually. You could roll with all 3 defensemen if you do waive Ryan Reeves. There is enough space that gives you 1.55. Realistically, that means you could get Match Pacioretty 1.15 million if that's the case. It'd be right up against the cap.
I mean,
150 grand on the cap.
That's just the way I see it. Like, I don't. They might just ultimately decide they're going to keep Ryan Reeves, and then that means, unfortunately, that means Steven Lorentz and maybe like one of those 2 are going to have to wait to figure out what's going to happen with them. Which I don't think There's also the part about putting them through waivers too, right? If they were to sign them after a certain point.
Well, so if you keep Reeves, then you do have to send down one of these defensemen. So that's it. Like you can have Lorentz and all 3 defensemen, or Reeves and no Lorentz, and you have to send down one other guy. So if you send down Reeves, you can have a full 23-man roster. If you keep Reeves on your roster, you can only have 22. So that's another decision where it's like, oh, maybe you do keep Lorentz, who can play all 3-4 positions, I might add. So I feel comfortable, actually. I'm just gonna do it. Like let's say that Steven Lorentz has made his way onto the team, and let's give him that spot, and then boom, here's our roster opening night. Should everything be healthy and whatnot, I think this might be what we're looking at. And let's say Yarncroc is injured. Let's say he's not ready to go for opening night. I think this is probably what we see.
Honestly, that's what it should be.
Yeah.
And at worst, you move McMahon to the 4th line and you put Pacioretty on the 3rd line.
Yeah, you could do that too. Put Bobby. Whoops, don't want to do that. Yeah, you put Bobby McMahon there, and then probably switch Pacioretty and Robertson around, since that's kind of how it's been. Yeah, this could possibly be the opening night lineup. So that'd be Nyes, Matthews, and Marner, Domi, Tavares, and Nylander, Pacioretty, Holmberg, and Robertson, Lorentz, Kampf, and Bobby McMahon. And then Calle Yarncroc is currently injured, so he's on the outside looking in on our roster right now. If not, then he pretty much goes in, and you could do whatever you want with this lineup. And maybe that's what it looks like potentially. If Yarncroc is ready to go. And then defensively, Riley Tanev, McCabe, OEL, Simon Benoit, and pick your poison, Liljegren or Timmins, I suppose. Phil Myers still in the fold as well. And then Joseph Woll and Anthony Stoll as your goalies. And Dave, this looks like this could potentially be the opening night roster for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll see if we're correct. We'll have a much better idea by 5 p.m. today, and then we'll know by the time we start our show tomorrow whether we're right or wrong in our assessment.
We'll see.
We will see. All right. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs pod on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Wojcik. Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.